Hello and welcome back to any returning listeners to the podcast. If this is your first time listening, my name is Hadiel Pinto. In 2018, I started my own small business where I distribute movie serials, feature films, and TV shows, all with roots in Pulp Fiction. This is my podcast one on one, where I take people that I admire on social media and force them to be my friend for half an hour. Today, I definitely have somebody who I admire on social media, and we follow each other. And she definitely follows a lot of film people on Twitter and has a lot of wonderful opinions. Today, I have Laura Horsfall.
So I don't know. You want to talk movies? What's the last thing you saw?
The last thing I watched was on Hulu. If we're not going to be counting screeners at all, because I'm trying not to talk about any screeners I've received, because I try to do my best without sounding biased toward any movie before I vote. Obviously, I've let that slip a couple times before. But the last thing I watched was a really weird double feature on Hulu the other night. My family showed me A Quiet Place for the first time because I still hadn't seen it, and then we watched The Art of Self Defense right after that.
Oh, that's right. I remember seeing your tweet and that you had just seen A Quiet Place. I think. Uh, yeah. A Quiet Place was good, but it has not stuck with me at all. Like I'd never think about rewatching it. What about you?
Like it's not a bad movie, but I feel like maybe if I hadn't seen it, I feel like this with certain movies definitely that if I hadn't seen it after the hype, maybe I would have enjoyed it more. I felt the same way after watching Booksmart for the first time. Booksmart is perfectly fine, but again, after you hear the hype for months and months and months, it just affects your expectations. And I was definitely like that with A Quiet Place. When I finally sat down and watched it, I didn't realize that film is comes in, I think, without credits, that comes in under 90 minutes, and it just feels very small. I feel like we have this idea that builds out this whole world. I feel the same way about Daybreakers with Ethan Hawke the first time I saw that. You have this whole world that you build out and this idea, and then the story that you're telling is extremely small, and it really doesn't feel like you're utilizing the setup that you introduced. I mean, even like in A Quiet Place, when they have the flashback and the youngest child dies on that bridge, and then later in the movie you see the daughter walk out to that bridge, and it was like a 10-minute walk for her. Like they didn't even really make it further than that area, which makes the movie feel even smaller.
I'll tell you, you're describing one of my favorite aspects of the film. I like that it's a completely contained story, and that when you do see someone outside the family, it's very briefly, and it's not something that's gonna, Chekhov's gun later down the line. I liked that it was just like, look, it's a big world full of terrible things, and they're just trying to make this tiny piece of it work. That aspect of it reminded me a lot of Signs, which one of my favorite things about Signs, and I think the reason it's still a pretty effective thriller is because it takes a large scale event and it gives you the microcosm view. It gives you just the one family, what it would be like, sort of pre Cloverfield, what it would be like to be experiencing something that we normally see in the Roland Emmerich style, from the opposite point of view. Instead of this cast, spanning the globe, and you're seeing the military and the president and the people on the ground. Instead of all that, you're just seeing this one corner. You don't know the mythology. You don't know everything that's led up to it. you're just hyper focusing on the processing, or in that's processing more in signs, and then in A Quiet Place's case, more just the survival, the sheer getting through each day. But why didn't they live by the goddamn waterfall in the river? If that's what's gonna save them. That was the biggest hole, of course, is like, if you need the river for sound cover, why not live at the river? Anyway.
I
But
mean,
yeah, it's not a brilliant movie. It's very competent. It's very competent. It's very cool. It's not the best thing ever.
I understand fully what you're saying. I mean, it wasn't just that it what took place in a small area necessarily. The pacing definitely affected the feel of the film for me. I haven't seen Signs in a while, but I remember that movie feeling kind of grander. In a sense, it felt more film-like, and I think people are going to kill me for saying this, but I think it's because M. Night Shyamalan is a better director than John Krasinski is. Definitely another thing about The Quiet Place, like I said, is the pacing. It honestly feels like the first episode of a TV show to me. It felt very TV like. Because I remember, like I said, I was watching with my sister, and Emily Blunt starts going into labor at one point in the movie, and I said, "Already? Like she's going into labor already?" And my sister's like, "Yeah, we're like halfway through the movie." And I paused it, and we were 45 minutes in, but it felt like we were only 20 minutes into the movie. It feels like by the time they're done explaining the premise of the story and of the world, it's already time for the third act, and that's what just kind of makes it feel more TV like for me.
Interesting. Okay, I mean, I do see. Mm, I mean, it's a short run in time, but which I thought was fine, because they weren't trying to expand it. They were just trying to make it about this family at this time. The thing about the birth is interesting, because for me, as soon as, to utilize an overused phrase, as a woman watching the film, as soon as I see her pregnant, knowing that she can't make noise, the whole movie becomes a ticking clock for me, because I'm just counting down. Oh man, like this is not going to go well. How do you, like, I can't even get through a menstruation without screaming my head off. I can't imagine, passing a 9-month baby out of my body silently. So for me, that was the single biggest source of suspense, was for me, was just knowing that this was going to come to a head, and there's nothing any of them could do about it. So I actually really liked that part of the pacing. It moved along very swiftly for me. But different takes. And you watched it much more recently than I did. I saw it in the theater once, which would have been, I guess, at this point, like 18 months ago or something.
Actually, yeah, I think it was almost 2 years ago. 'Cause I think it came out in like
Yeah.
spring of 2018, and
Yeah.
we're already in 2020 now.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have a problem with the birth. I mean, I thought that was a good idea, even though it fully didn't make sense because they are like 400 days into this, and it only takes 9 to 10 months to bring a child into the world. So obviously that means they had sex after this all went down, which is kind of weird to think about. But
It's not, though, because think about the way humans react to psychologically and physically intense situations. One of the main human responses to a feeling of impending doom or hopelessness is the desire for any kind of connection, and they already have a physical and emotional intimacy. It makes total sense to me that they would be clinging on to this small available source of joy that they have at their disposal.
okay, I mean, I again that makes sense. I just again I didn't. connect with the film the same way everybody else did. I think it's still, for the most part, a well-made movie, even though I think, like I said, it feels like we get a first act and a third act, and they forgot to put a second act in the middle. That's just how it feels to me. But you know,
So it
I
sounds like I'm at about 3.5 out of 5 stars, and you're at about 2.5.
I just started Letterbox this morning. I put it at a 3. I think
Oh,
3 is a nice average ranking for that movie.
yeah, that's like a little over fresh, right?
Yeah, that'd be what, like 65%. Yeah, that's about right.
I did have a similar reaction to Booksmart, in as you did, in that but I kind of knew from the trailers that it was going for a particular kind of party vibe that I don't always connect to in, kind of teen flicks or whatnot. I frankly, I hated Superbad. I hated it. But yeah, no, Booksmart was quite good, but it was a little bit. She uses the tropes where with the slow mo cranked up pop soundtrack while they're, like speeding in a car or doing 25 other things, because she reuses that trope in the film multiple times, and every time she did, it took me out of the film. But in between all of those sequences, I really liked it a lot.
No, yeah, I think it, like I said, it's a solid movie. I watched it twice. I watched it in the theaters by myself, and then when it came on Hulu, I asked my family, like, "Do you want to watch it?" And they were like, "I don't know." Like, I didn't have a lot of interest. But then, like, one night they got home from work and they're like, "We want to laugh," and I'm like, "Let's just watch Booksmart." And they were like, "Fine." And so they liked it too. They said they probably wouldn't want to watch it again. Like, that's one of those watch one time, have a good time movies, which I'm fine with. That's understandable. I only watched it the second time because I wanted to show it to them. Like, it's a well-made film. I liked it. I just feel like I would have liked it more if people weren't declaring it like the best movie of the year, like in January. And 2019 was a lot of that. I mean, even on the last episode of Black Girls Do Stuff Too, my friend Nick, who's on that show, she talked about this a little bit on their last episode, about how a lot of 2019 was people calling movies the best ever, the best of the year, best of the decade, and it got a little much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big temptation for a lot of folks. I'm not a big list maker myself. And yeah, the Booksmart to me is very much in the vein of Dazed and Confused. It's totally solid. Something that if I was 16, I could watch, like twice a week after school with my friends, just on in the background. It's a lot of fun. I really like Dazed and Confused. I like all these characters. I want to spend time with all these characters. But again, like Dazed and Confused, it's not a movie that I would ever consider at any point for best of the year. It's just a very well made, fun, small movie. Um, I did for best of this year, and I don't have any best of the decade. I know what I've probably watched the most, and it's probably not most people's best of the decade, except for if Zodiac came out this decade. I've watched that a lot.
No, that's 2007.
Yeah, so there you go. Right there you go. And I watched Carol several times, so maybe that would be the biggest qualifier. Um, but yeah, this year I'm still out there, and you'll see me retweeting many, 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 many times in the coming weeks. Portrait of a Lady on Fire. A lot of us film lesbian Twitter users are pretty on fire for that flick, and so I'm excited when it finally gets a release around here that I can go see it again. I haven't seen it since October. And how it is when you just like fall in love with a film and you want to keep talking about it. but then months go by and you can't see it again. It's hard to talk about in any kind of detail um, with confidence. Uh, and then, yeah, besides that for the year, like, I don't, my favorites this year, uh, I mean, like, Crawl, I had a great time at. Terminator, I had a great time at. I don't know what to say critically because a lot of I guess Marriage Story is way up there. But almost all the foreign films I still have to see that people are talking about. Oh, and Little Women. That was the other one where Little Women is probably the one film where it could win almost any award and I would feel semi okay about it. I just thought that was a 5 out of 5.
Yeah, I really enjoy Little Women. I liked Marriage Story. I didn't love Marriage Story. I know I'm in a small boat on that one. And then I had my one gripe with Little Women, which I seem to be the only one in the world that has this gripe. But if it were to win Best Picture, I would be happy. If she won Best Director, I would be happy. I know it's starting to look like maybe 1917 might win. I haven't seen that yet. We might go see it after the football game ends in a little bit because that's going to start right now. So we might go see 1917. I'm not sure. But from what I've heard, it sounds like people are falling in love with that movie because of the technical aspects, which I understand. But I don't know if you saw that I had tweeted out a few years ago that I feel like people seem to have forgotten lately that the technical aspects are just one part of movies. There are a lot of elements that go into making a film, and just because something is executed well on a technical level doesn't necessarily make it a great movie.
Yeah, I am definitely way in your camp on that one. I'm also not into war movies. Like I didn't see Dunkirk because I don't want to feel like I'm in a war. I'm already very anti-war. I don't need a film to shell me, essentially, for me to know that it's a real bad situation. And again, yeah, like I respect the technical ambition. I respect the skill in execution. But yeah, it's unless there's a heck of a lot more going on. I'm not interested in a war movie. I mean, it took me into my 30s, I think, to see Apocalypse Now. Um, for instance. Which I do love and I think is tremendous. But that's because it's a completely different kind of war movie, and it's about nothing except the pure insanity of the concept of war to begin with. But yeah, 1917, I'll be skipping, and highly likely we'll see that scoop up. I mean, I would guess because of that technical aspect, 1917 is one of those movies that could totally do, 7 to 10 Oscars cuz they'll just give it all kinds of sound design and editing and stuff like that.
Exactly. And because I'm not 100% sure, like I think it will be an interesting experience, very much like Dunkirk. I've talked with other people on Twitter about how I don't know if Dunkirk is necessarily a great movie, but it's an interesting, like it's a great experience. Like I saw that in the theater, and it's very much more an experience than a film. A couple of my family members were watching it at home after it came out on DVD, and I mean, I could tell. Like, I only watched bits and pieces because I was like working on the computer doing something else, but I could definitely tell that with that movie, the home experience isn't really the same. I have a feeling it will be the same thing with 1917. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about the gimmick of trying to make it look like all one shot, because obviously films have done that before. I don't know if we necessarily should be congratulating them on doing that because for with my experience with films that have done that in the past, it's definitely a choice that the filmmaker makes to do, but I don't know if it necessarily always adds something to the story itself. So I don't know if we should necessarily be patting people on the back for doing something that's extra hard and even, adds even more difficulty to the production when it might not necessarily add something to the storytelling itself.
I can't speak on what it's doing for 1917. Obviously, I mean, I guess I would assume that it's supposed to be just extremely immersive in with that format. But I will say that probably the most famous one, Rope, I find the more I watch Rope, the more I think that it was integral for Hitchcock to uh, create that idea within the movie that that there are no pauses, there are no breaks in this story. It's because what it gives you is a theater experience without the rest of the audience. Essentially, it's like you're watching a play, and with a story rather like Rope that is centered on these two characters and the metaphor of the rope as the noose is tightening around their necks as folks get closer and closer to discovering their crime. The fact that the scene never cuts makes the viewer feel that they also can't escape the confines of that apartment and that I guess cocktail party, dinner party. It so that once it really starts to kind of pot boil and you get James Stewart, their professor, really starting to confront them about the fact that he knows something's going on, once he starts digging his heels in terms of there being other layers to this soiree they're throwing, you already have that feeling of being stuck there with them. And so once they go from confidence to just nervousness and then a little bit of terror, you get to feel that with them too because you're all trapped in this apartment. So it can be used in a way that makes the story far more effective than it would, because the story is just about one little murder in this one little apartment. You never know the victim, so you don't actually care about the victim. You only care about the killers. But it's the technique that gives the story all of its weight. So anyway,
Okay.
yeah, I can talk about Hitchcock. I like Hitchcock a lot.
Oh no, I could tell. I still haven't seen Rope actually. I need to get around to that one eventually. But the last two movies that I saw with this gimmick were was a Silent House with Elizabeth Olsen, and then I watched part of Birdman and I didn't really like it, so I didn't finish it. But with those two, it felt more like a gimmick. It didn't really add to the story. So as much as I am very interested in seeing 1917, as much as I do have respect for Sam Mendes, I'm just not sure how I feel about like all these other really wonderful stories, being told this award season being kind of upended by a gimmick.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. But I mean, the mainstream awards, they love epic war movies. Like they just that's anyway. That's how it feels to someone like me who does not, you know. But it seems like they really go in for that. Because it's got everything. It's like, oh, it's the action, but it's also like the drama and the emotion and all kinds of gore and stuff. Oh, but it's justified because wars really happen, and it just seems like it kind of has everything they want. And then, of course, the biggest part is that it's just a lot of men and more men, so many men. And then, of course, because they always hyper focus on certain battles in certain wars, it's white men. So it's just a bunch of white men being white men with guns and stuff. So I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me why the Academy and the Hollywood Foreign Press like that stuff. It's just a real easy go-to for them.
Exactly, and
Unfortunately,
I just want to state for the listener, even though this podcast will come out after the Oscar nominations have been announced, we were recording this 2 days before, so neither of us know for a fact that that will get nominated.
oh, they're
It's
coming
probably
out Monday morning.
Yeah, they're coming out Monday morning.
Okay.
It's a really weird schedule this year. They're coming out Monday morning, and then the awards are at the beginning of February. It's the same thing with the Spirit Awards because Spirit Awards always come out the or are broadcast the day before the Oscars. It's been a really weird award season because I got my screeners before Christmas, and I didn't realize they were in my inbox because it was before Christmas. So I was working my butt off, and then trying to finish buying gifts and wrapping gifts because I usually don't get those till like the middle of January, but because everything is at the beginning of February this year, I got them super early. So it's a weird award season.
Yeah, I don't have access to my screeners anymore. I also work at a UPS store, and I used to work at one where one of the box holders, he was a former box holder. He's in the editing guild. So they sent him everything, and like my boss would just be like, "Hey, you want to take Black Panther?" Like, yeah. So I lost that connection. Unfortunately, I don't work at that store anymore. But is it nice to get screeners? I'll tell you what, it's because I haven't even seen Parasite. I haven't seen Parasite because I can't get my butt to the theater.
Well, hopefully that after award season that should hopefully come on digital at some point so you can see it.
That's what
Um,
I'm guessing. Is like I'm as soon as it's nominated for Best Foreign Film Academy Award, I mean I can only imagine they would put it available for digital rental to make that money for people like me who don't have time always to get to the theater.
Exactly. Yeah, that's understandable. So again, hopefully in 2 days the nominations will be good. I'm really hoping for movies like Little Women to get a Best Picture. It would be nice if Greta Gerwig got Best Director, but obviously I would like Lulu Wang to be in there for the farewell more so. Like if I had to pick one, which I shouldn't have to, it would be nice to have multiple women nominated. But it's the Academy, so of course they can never have more than one if they ever have one. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Catherine Bigelow thing was supposed to tide us over for the rest of our lives, is what it appears to be. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the films directed by women this year that are supposed to be amazing, I haven't even seen yet. I haven't seen The Farewell, which I trust is quite good. It looks quite good. I haven't seen The Nightingale, which I really, really want to see as well. I did see Hustlers and had a nice big back and forth with my manga boss about that one. He hated it, and I really liked it. I think he hated it because the victims reminded him of himself.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that was definitely another one. Again, if we were to have three female directors, Greta Gerwig and Lulu Wang, and I can never pronounce her name correctly, Lauren Scafaria, if I'm correct. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but if the
I'm not
three of
gonna try.
if the three of them got nominated, plus like Bong Joon Ho
Mm-hmm.
and Pedro Almodovar, like that'd be a perfect nomination block for me. Because as much as I really enjoyed The Irishman, I even put it in my top 10. I don't think those decisions all necessarily panned out properly. So I don't know if I would want to reward Scorsese with a Best Directing nomination for that particular movie. Even though I mean, obviously his body work is great, but just things like that. Same thing with Tarantino. I wouldn't give it to him this year just because of certain poor decisions made in that film. But they probably will both get nominated. So I don't.
I want Celine Sciamma to be nominated for Best Director for Portrait of a Lady on Fire because she directed all the cuss words out of that film. It it is what it is completely because of the way that she crafted it. And of course, she wrote it as well. I would love for her to get a screenplay nomination. She won't get either of those, even though they would be, in my limited estimation, because as I said, I haven't seen several of the much talked about films this year. In my limited estimation, she really deserves just a heap of credit for the film that she made. I take it you haven't had an opportunity to see Portrait of a Lady on Fire yet.
They sent me a screener. I did watch it earlier this week. I
Ah,
don't want to say too much about it, like I said, because
okay, fair
that
enough.
is that is nominated for Best International Movie, so I don't want to sound biased about any of the films. I will agree that it is a very well made film, and I would not be upset if she got Best Original Screenplay, again, because she would deserve it more than some of the other ones that have been nominated. I will say I think Marriage Story screenplay definitely has problems. I think again, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has a lot of problems with that screenplay, and then Knives Out definitely has a lot of problems with that screenplay as well. And those are three that keep getting nominated over and over again for Best Original Screenplay. Um, because I think more so because of the people who wrote them than the content, because they definitely all suffer from, like I said, problems that I don't know we could tout them as necessarily the best screenplays of the year.
Yeah, I mean Quentin Tarantino hasn't gotten his like quote unquote career makeup award. You know, he hasn't gotten his Oscar for The Departed like Scorsese did. So yeah, I mean it's likely. It's highly likely, and yeah, he's riding on his reputation very well, very well. I turned off the Hateful Eight. I don't think I'm a big Tarantino fan anymore.
No, definitely Hateful Eight and Hollywood are his two worst films.
Okay, well it's good to know. I might go back and watch Django still at some point. Uh, it are So I don't know how long it's been, but I was gonna say the if you wanted to continue, I wanted to ask you more about the heart of uh, your subject, but also mine, which is pulp.
Yeah, we could talk for a little longer. I don't mind. Like I said, I have all day. We've been talking for about 40 minutes now, so
Oh yeah.
we already been talking. But again, it there's no time limit. That's usually just the time I set because people are more comfortable with talking for 30 minutes or so. But we can go on for as long as you want.
Well, I think I was talking about rope for about 12 and a half minutes because you know. But yeah, well, I was just kind of curious. I suspect you're a little younger than I am, or more than a little, and I'm just curious what your kind of pulp origins are, in terms of the those touchstones that maybe you didn't, but maybe you did grow up with, that that you associate with pulp, and when you watch things within that genre or that touch that genre, that's the place that it goes back to for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. So, it all really started in like 2012. I had graduated from high school in 2011. Yeah, I'm only 27, so I'm probably a little bit younger than you are. And so
Wait.
I was online filling out applications trying to find a job. I think yeah, I was going to community college part time at that point since I was fresh out of high school, but obviously I needed a job. And on TV, the 1980 Flash Gordon movie had come on, and I had always heard the name Flash Gordon. I knew nothing about the character or anything about that. I watched the film that afternoon, fell head over heels in love with it. Uh, Back in 2012, that's when Netflix was still cool, so they had the original Flash Gordon serial on there, and so that November, I think it was even over like Thanksgiving week, I had watched the original Flash Gordon serial. and fall in love with the character. I think it took a couple years before I really started looking into it and doing research and had discovered the term pulp and had really connected the dots with different types of characters, realizing that characters like the Phantom was a pulp hero, and realizing that certain movies like that I had watched with my dad when I was a kid were adventure pulp stories. And so over the last few years, I want to say from like 2016 to 2018 when I started the business, that's when I started really head diving into what pulp was and watching a lot more movies and serials and reading a couple different books about it. And I was going to I had gone back to school, I think it was like late 2016 early 2017, and I wanted to start my own business. And actually this wasn't necessarily the business I was going to start. um I was going to start a business, which, I mean, if this is successful, if I can make money from this, I would like to do this other business as well. Originally, it was going to be a website marketplace for people who make short films as a way to sell their films directly to their targeted audience, instead of trying to go through like Netflix and Hulu and places that are not really paying them fairly, or even giving them the time of the day. And so then in 2017, I was, like I guess I was in school studying for that when both Valerian and The Last Jedi had come out and were definitely very heavily influenced by Pulp. And people didn't really have an understanding for those films, and both of those films did receive a lot of hate. And that's when I had decided that I was changing the direction of what my business was going to be. And in summer of 2018, I started filing paperwork, and here we are.
Okay. Okay. Well, very famous podcasters, critically acclaimed. I believe they gave positive reviews, very positive reviews to both of those films. So you got one core critical team on your side on Valerian and The Last Jedi. I mean, I think probably the majority of folks that saw The Last Jedi thought it was between good and great, and then there was the vocal minority who have not let any of us stop hearing about how they hated it, since they came out. But I think you're in the majority with The Last Jedi. I think most of us saw it and recognized how how good it was. That it was a good story, first of all, before being a good Star Wars story, and then it was a good Star Wars story because it was doing something with characters and situations that made sense, instead of thematically, instead of just like, hey, we're going in a circle, don't you love going in a circle, circles, uh which I enjoyed the Circle of the Force Awakens, but I didn't need another one after that, I guess. But yeah, I was kind of curious, like, okay, the stuff you talk about when you're a kid watching with your dad, like, what's that? What are those? Are you talking about the Phantom? Are you talking about Stephen Summers' Mummy movies? Like, what do you?
Yeah, definitely a lot of those like pulp properties, or them trying to revive that stuff in the 90s. Like I said, yeah, the Billy Zane Phantom, the Indiana Jones series, of course, every time they came on TV. Obviously the Star Wars series as a whole has a lot of pulp influence.
Oh, I mean, major, yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit.
So and yeah, like you said, the Mummy movies, which I had enjoyed as a kid and actually didn't watch again until I think 2018, and then realized they were also adventure pulp films because I hadn't seen them since I was like 8 or 9 or whenever I had watched those movies. But definitely a lot of that 90s adventure stuff that we don't get nowadays because studios aren't greenlighting things because of the types of stories they think audiences would like. They're greenlighting things because of the recognizable characters that the audiences will pay to see. And a lot of these pulp characters obviously audience have disconnected from and aren't willing to shell out the money to go see John Carter or Valerian or something of that nature.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I think I enjoyed Kong Skull Island as much as I did, and even more on the second viewing was it. It really embraces the pulp of it all. It does overuse the official Vietnam era soundtrack recordings. However, that aside, it's a great celebration of what modern technology can do for pulp cinema. In terms of giving you just the sheer scale of that Kong and everything like that. Just made it a ton of fun. And giving us the John C. Reilly, like, kookiness that you need, you also need a generous splash of actual insanity in pulp material, I think, to give it that whimsy, that spin, you know. And Raiders and Return of the Jedi were my two probably most formative pulp viewing experiences. I would have been about 3 and 4 years old watching those. But if you really want to get into it, it would be Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, those comic books. I have comics from my childhood that are covered in crayon because I didn't know how to read yet. So, and that's from a time when the material that comics were printed on was pulp. It was pulp paper. It was newsprint, or a little bit thicker than newsprint. It was not ever meant to age well. The colors, looked a little like garbage. It did not reflect light or capture light very well. It was pulp. The comics were pulp back in 1981, 1982. So that would have been the first thing I had my hands on, and they were, some of them, very, very far pulpier at that time. I had, because Marvel had Dracula and the werewolf comics, so I had those, and I think they reissued some Tales of the Crypt in the 80s, and then and they also in the 80s like first started coming out with collections of Superman and Batman in the 40s. You could, finally see those, and Spider-Man. I had a Spider-Man from the dailies, from the 60s, the newspaper strips, and then of course Dick Tracy came out, and that was kind of a pulp explosion for me. Just discovering the world of stylized gangsters and Chester Gould, and spending all of my time drawing strange faced men in oversized suits, holding guns. And then, it was like a quick succession after Dick Tracy. We got the Rocketeer, and the Phantom and the Shadow, which was kind of neat. And all because of the '89 Batman. They were trying to figure out how to do something that recreated that success.
Oh yeah, definitely. You brought up a lot of great stuff there. Yeah, definitely the Rocketeer. I remember that being on TV a lot, and that's still one of my favorites. Dick Tracy, 1990 is good. I bought it on Blu-ray. I think it was like $5 at Best Buy. Because we had the VHS when I
Sounds
was a
right.
kid. Yeah, we had the VHS when I was a kid. I remember watching it, but it was, again, I was like 5, so I really don't remember anything. Well, I didn't remember anything. Obviously, I watched it again last year, and I think for the most part, it's good. I think Warren Beatty was not necessarily the right person to direct it. Obviously, I know he owns the rights to it. I think he still owns the rights to Dick Tracy. Um, but like I think it goes a little over the top, and I think Warren Beatty confuses pulp and film noir a little too much, because I understand that obviously pulp detective stories had influence on film noir. Obviously, that's where femme fatales came from. Even though people will always credit film noir for having femme fatales, obviously they came from pulp stories first. And he just, I don't know if he fully understands what pulp is, because you definitely have that kind of arc in his Dick Tracy movie, where Dick Tracy is gonna cheat on his best girl with Madonna, and he feels very conflicted, and it's a little morally ambiguous, which of course is one of the cornerstones of film noir, and not really necessarily a part of pulp, because usually pulp heroes are kind of the best of us. They're the best they can be. They're the heroes. They don't have you know moments like that.
That's extremely astute. That's acutely astute of you to make that observation. I'm a little thrilled to hear that, because it's a film I've seen countless times over the last 30 years. And yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're absolutely correct. There is uh, essentially a love triangle, and although I don't think he's ever really tempted, the fact that there's even a spark of conflict, of moral conflict, in terms of that. And remember, it's not just the conflict of whether he's going to cheat on essentially his fiance or not. It's also the conflict of the person who he maybe could be tempted to cheat with is in bed with the mob. Literally, that's Big Boy Caprice's gal. So it would be probably in a real Dick Tracy's mind, the bigger compromise wouldn't even be cheating on his girlfriend. It would be cheating on his police work. And the fact that that exists in that film is noir. That is not pulp. None of that is ever present in the Chester Gould comics, nor in the serials. Or I guess they're not serials. They're like 60-minute movies that they made several of back in the day. Yeah, no, that is a modern edition that does come straight. I shouldn't say straight from Warren Beatty. Who wrote it? Might have been Sam Hamm, but yeah, it is a little bit later addition to it. But I think for me as a kid that worked. For me as a kid, it added more. And there's so much of the aesthetic that I fell in love with as a kid, and the nature of the dialogue, which it I'm not sure of the right way to phrase it, but the dialogue doesn't always service the story as much as it just services the moment in the scene, which is really odd for like a detective yarn. And then, but the other part of Dick Tracy being sort of the big pulp explosion moment for me was they released a three-parter comic book adaptation, but the third one was the adaptation of the film, and the first two are prequels, and they're all drawn by Kyle Baker, who's just a fantastic, highly stylized artist, totally different from Chester Gould, nothing like him, and brought his own vision to that world. And that three-part Dick Tracy story is one of the best comic book stories I've ever read. It's really gritty. It is not the same rating as the film, and I highly recommend anyone that is even mildly interested in either Dick Tracy or Kyle Baker, or just kind of gangster stories in general, like, do check out Kyle Baker's Dick Tracy three-parter. It's just fantastic. And it, literally and figuratively drew me in, as it were. All right, so now I've said my piece about Dick Tracy. I feel far more satisfied.
Okay, and then I just want to add there were both in the late 30s Ralph Bird was in serials as Dick Tracy, and then 10 years later when RKO did the four movies, they had a different actor in the first two movies, and then they had brought Ralph Bird back for the other two.
So there are actual serials, because I think I've only seen the longer versions from the 40s. So I didn't
Yeah,
know that there were actual serials,
yeah, I have the
unless they
1937.
compiled them.
Yeah, I own the 1937 one that's just titled Dick Tracy. Definitely I need to get the website back up. I've been so lazy with that lately, but I need to cuz I'm switching I'm going with a different host, and so I need to kind of start from scratch again, but that was my fault. That was my great idea. I didn't realize how lazy I was going to be, how long it was going to take, but definitely I own that full one from 1937, just called Dick Tracy, and so I need to put the site back up and put that back up for you to watch, definitely, because that's a good one.
Yeah, the other ones are on demand on I think Dish is what I have. So that's available, but I don't think they have that one. I think they just have, versus Cue Ball and like the other more famous ones. But
Okay.
anyway,
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say okay. Maybe I might because I still hadn't chosen a new serial to do for Pulporama on YouTube. So maybe I'll go with Dick Tracy.
I would definitely follow along. You would definitely have my attention with that guy.
Okay. Well, I think this is a good place to end it. I mean, we've been talking for a good hour now.
Yeah, like
Again,
I said my Dick Tracy piece,
yeah.
and this is very important to me.
And I just want to I do want to add one more thing because I don't want to forget this. I want to add one more thing before we end. I'm glad you did mention Superman and Batman because I mean those characters have definitely evolved and changed over time, but definitely when they first started they were very pulpy. I think it's funny when people who are fans of Batman always complain nowadays that like Batman's not a detective anymore, and I think it's funny because they don't realize that the reason he was a detective in the first place was because of course the detective stories like Dick Tracy were very popular in that time. Like they were extremely popular, and that's mainly why obviously there's that detective inspiration for Batman. And of course if you look at something like John Carter, that's obviously the first Superman story when you think about it. So I don't.
Well, I think the Superman stories you go back to ancient myth on that one. You got some Greek sources to cite for Superman. Uh, but I will also say with Batman, just kind of it all goes in a big circle. You know who was really popular and famous before Batman came along was the Phantom and the Shadow and the Spider. No one ever talks about the spider with a Y, but those were, well, the Phantom didn't have a cloak, but he did a lot of what Batman did, and then the Shadow and the Spider were both like dark, cloaked, mysterious crime fighters that were doing good, but you, even as a quote innocent person, didn't want to run into them in a dark alley. So very much, you know, Batman, he didn't spring forth, from nothing. There was not a vacuum in terms of the origin of any of our now popular superheroes. That's for sure.
Exactly. There were definitely several Playboy millionaires. I definitely, yes, the Shadow was definitely a huge inspiration of Batman. I agree with that. There was even a reason I can't remember who did the other publication. There were two. DC did one version, and then the other publication did the other. I'd have to go look at my comic books in the other room. But there was a Shadow Batman that they printed a couple years ago, and there was a scene where basically Bruce Wayne looks at Lamont Cranston and says like, "You taught me everything I know." So that was a good scene.
Accurate.
But yeah. I mean, yeah, people don't realize there's a lot of Playboy billionaires. The Shadow, like you said, the Spider, the Green Hornet, Zorro, even was definitely kind of part of that structure.
Well, I think you just named probably the biggest one. I mean, Zorro, that goes back to what, the 19 teens? Something like that?
Yeah,
I mean, so yeah, like it's you, everything but the billionaire status is kind of all right there.
I mean, he still is rich though. Like he does kind of play in that, pretending to be more of a daintier, weaker kind of rich person that doesn't do anything from themselves, and then jumps into the Zorro type character when needed.
Jumps into the costume and onto horseback. Yeah, we could use another round of Zorro movies. I'd go watch those.
Exactly, definitely. I definitely have ideas for Zorro movies. I would love to make one, but obviously I don't have the money or the license to do that. But oh well, maybe one day.
Yeah, I know I would watch. I would definitely watch it. I would definitely watch it.
Okay,
Right.
okay, so we're gonna say goodbye for real now because I had I faked out a few minutes ago. Okay, so again, thank you everybody for watching, not watching, for listening. Thank you everybody for listening. I really appreciate it. I
Me
hope you
too.
enjoy. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for being on here. I really appreciate it, and I would honestly love to have you on again sometime.
All right, on. It was a great conversation. Thank you for asking me. It's flattering and fun and stimulating. And yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to go back to work now.
Okay,
All
so bye everybody.
right, see y'all's on the internet.